Well, welcome everybody to this
Recording in
Nordic
progress.
Horizons event. Yes, I think we all have to accept that recording is in progress. If you two got that on your screen. That was the first thing I have to say to you, actually, that we are recording this event. So if you don't want to be seen in it, you can lurk without having your cameras on. But if you want to kind of pop in into vision, that's welcome too. What else have I to say? This is also being streamed by Independence Live, so it's on quite a number of different platforms. So that's what you'll see. Apologies for a slightly late start. We had a strange phenomenon of getting the most important people in the entire universe tonight, who are our speakers, into this Zoom room. And I hope you didn't have that problem. Why we're having this? Well, actually, in a funny way, I think this is not bad timing because there's been, obviously, after COP26 in Glasgow, there was an immediate flurry of analysis, of disappointment, of speakers from political figures from different countries, essentially trying to make a bit of brave face on it and to find positives. And now maybe the dust has settled a little bit and we're able to think a little bit about the fact that whatever did or didn't come out of COP, it was always going to be up to us to keep going, to keep finding ways to decarbonize our societies. And that hasn't changed. We still are here trying to find the best way forward. So the purpose of tonight really is to try to look probably beyond COP26 to see where we could be going. Obviously, from Scotland's point of view, we're just very lucky to have a set of Nordic neighbours who have mostly managed to get further along some of the roads we have to walk to try to get further along, particularly with heating. So we've got a great array of speakers tonight to try and focus on to see if there's something we can learn about where they're going with their various energy policies. And it's just possible as well that on this occasion, there might be something useful to say back the way from Scotland. But as ever, if you're a regular with Nordic Horizons, you just wouldn't be holding your breath on that. So what I'm going to do is just introduce the speakers that we have straight away. And I'll just do that right now. We have Søren Hermansen, who's director of the Energy Academy on Samsø, which is a small Danish island that's just been made the UN Climate Leader Award winner for 2021. And Søren was a previous speaker at Nordic Horizons back in 2013, I think. We've also got Viktoria Raft, who's an energy journalist. She's now head of communications at the Swedish Housing Association. And she's co-founder of the Gender Equality Network for Women in Energy, Craft. That was a well-timed cough. Craft Kvinnorna, and member of the Nordic Energy Equality Network. So that's Viktoria. I'm puzzled as to why I heard somebody cough there, but I'm not going to dwell on it. We have as well Furevik, who's professor in physical oceanography at the Geophysical Institute of Bergen University, and also director of the Nansen Environmental and Remote Sensing Centre. Like, he's big on oceans, Ture, and he's a previous Nordic Horizons speaker when he talked about climate change several years ago. And we always have a Scot in the room besides myself, because quite a lot of the time it's hard to know when you listen to the various Nordic perspectives how that meshes really with Scotland, because a lot of the time we don't know our own place well enough. So the man to whom that task falls tonight is Dr. Keith Baker, who's a researcher in fuel poverty and energy policy at the Glasgow Caledonian University. He's co-founder of the Energy Poverty Research Initiative and a member of the Energy Working Group at Commonweal, the think tank, and also an associate of 100% Renewable UK. So that gives you a bit of a clue where he's coming from. I should say that Claire Mack, the director of Scottish Renewables, was hoping to join us tonight, but she's, as we would say in Scotland, affi ne wheel, which for our Nordic friends means she's not very well at all. But maybe you got it actually the first time. So sorry to hear that, and Claire's had to pull out. Now, just to say as well that we're at a stage, Nordic Horizons, where we have a little crowdfunder on the go, which is something that you can find quite easily if you're on social media. It would help us enormously if you could give that a push, because we've got about another 24 days to raise enough money to keep these virtual events happening. So that's all to just introduce matters. Now, can we cut to the chase pretty much initially by just looking, however, at COP26? And I was asking each of our contributors to think, I know this is terribly simplistic, but you're looking at basically changing the entire infrastructure of the world when you're looking at the issues COP26 was grappling with. So to try to make this manageable, we're just going to try and ask each contributor to just start off by saying what one thing they thought was a positive that you could take from COP26 and what was the biggest negative. They might all be the same, but I doubt it. So let's start with Søren Hermansen from Samsø, because Søren was there actually picking up his award. So Søren, the positive, big positive and the big negative.
Yeah, that was a good question to open with. I think we have some echo here. I don't know.
I think that's because I see you in there twice, which I think will be the product of you trying to get in so many times. That happened to me. So I think, Lily, you have to probably remove one of the profiles of Søren to stop that.
Can you do that?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll just leave Lily to do that and just go and see if the problem gets remedied by having only one appearance in life, which Viktoria and Tore are just there once, I hope. So let's start with Tore Furevik. Tore, what did you think then, just looking at COP26, negative and positive?
Yes, thank you, Lesley, and also thank you for the invitation. So I actually have more positive than negative things on the list. I was actually quite positively impressed by the meeting, just to say that for the start. So I think the most important thing now is that we see that countries are stepping up their ambitions. So if you go before the Paris Agreement, so people are talking about business as usual, that was a 4 to 5 degrees warmer world. So now we are talking about, we are coming close to 2 degrees. So before the Glasgow meeting, just by looking at the current policies, the countries would head towards, or the world would head towards 2.7 degrees. But if we just take all the pledges in Paris and also take all the pledges when it comes to becoming climate neutral in 2050 or 60 or 70, then we are actually now below 2 degree warming. So we see that more and more countries are stepping up their ambitions. And also, for instance, one of the results of the Glasgow meeting was that there will be a new pledges given already next year. So that should have been in 2025, and now it will be already 2022. So we see that there is, the ambitions are stepping up. So I think that's the main, I would say that's the number one good positive thing with the Glasgow meeting, that we see more and more countries are stepping up ambitions, and also when it comes to stock taking and all these things. And the number one negative thing is that there is still not enough finances there. So when it comes to finance mitigation, finance adaptation in the developing world, then we are still far from the goal of, for instance, $100 billion per year to finance technology development and mitigation in developing countries. So just to summarize, number one is that we see that, or the positive thing, we see that the world is now stepping up ambitions. The negative thing is that we still need lots of money on the table to really get the developing world also to follow.
Yeah,
so, and
as we've seen today, with all the problems there are regarding the latest COVID variant, the same lack of scruples, you might say, the same difficulty in not delivering what's been promised to the developing world is evident there. And that's all part of the politics, isn't it? You know,
it's part of the politics, and we also saw that towards the end of the Glasgow negotiations. We also see that, especially the African countries, but also other, they really hesitated to sign agreements. So I think next year the COP27 will be in Egypt, and then I think the African countries, they will demand much more push on this finance mechanism. So I think that will be a big issue in the years to come.
Okay, I'm not sure yet whether to try Søren, but let's have a shot again. Søren, can you try again?
I can. Is this better?
Yes, that is you without an echo.
I managed to shut myself out so I didn't appear twice. I mean, I know I'm important, but that, I mean, twice can be too much. So thank you for your patience. I enjoyed being in Glasgow, not only because we got the award, but I think I'm not a usual COP what do you call it, participant. It was actually my first COP meeting ever, because I avoid big groups of people in big top-down political arenas, because I don't think I have a say there really. But I must admit, I met a lot of very interesting people, and I had a lot of networking exercises there. And I really enjoyed to meet many of my network partners from Canada, from Australia, from Japan, and other places who were there. And in this atmosphere, it was very hospitable and very well organized in Glasgow. I think I liked the atmosphere there. It was not overly security minded, and it was not like too hectic. It was just like a big market, so it was generally a nice feeling. I also left the meeting, so I was there for the force to attend a big session with the First Nations from Canada with indigenous clean energy, the ICE program, which was really nice, and it reflects very much what I do. So I left and went to Oban and took the ferry to Mull. And I went out to see people I knew on Mull, and we had a meeting there. We should have been to Iona, but it was too windy. It was like 42 meters per second. It's really, really windy. And out there we talked about relevant things as how do we feel, what's life like, how do we survive being left alone on small islands when the big guys are talking in Glasgow. And so we had a COP meeting in a meeting house in Kintyre, where we organized almost everything and had a really good time, and we finished with some really good Scottish shepherd's pie and some whiskey, and I felt good about it. And then I could go back to the COP meeting on the Monday and prepare for receiving the Climate Leader Award, and actually feel that I was in Scotland, not in a global UN network meeting. So all in all, it was a really good meeting for me, and a nice occasion to talk to friends and feel a little bit connected to the big guys convention.
I hesitate to ask for any negative, because that is great to hear.
Oh, should I say some negative?
Well, if you can bring yourself to.
I think the interesting thing is the separation between the meeting and the people out in the streets of Glasgow. I think it's not so nice that we have a lot of young people on the streets, and then at the same time we have all these very important people talking and negotiating details in a big plan that has to be much more effective and much faster, and then listen to the young people saying and allow them to say blah blah blah, which I think is right. The young people should do that. They should object to the big strategic meetings here also, but I sometimes need a stronger connection also. So I think it was a pity that we couldn't have an open session morning.
Yeah, and that's tremendous to imagine you getting off to Oban, then Mull, and somehow back to Kintyre, to sort of sample the real Scotland. I'm so glad you did, because having been at COP26 myself as a Scot, it didn't feel particularly, the whole thing is just a managed experience, really. So I'm glad you got somewhere. There is that irony as well, that the award your island got, and I hope people afterwards, if we can put the link in, we'll have the link to the previous presentations you made about Samsø, but it's this small energy-rich island with loads of turbines on it, which transformed from being a kind of bunch of conservative farmers, I think you described them, with a small c, 20, 30 years ago, and has shifted itself completely. Now, one of the reasons you could do that is because you have tremendous links, grid connections with Denmark. And this is the reason that a little island I'm very interested in, which you could have seen on your journey perhaps, is the island of Egg on Scotland, which has got an off-grid system, but that's because there's no connection to virtually any of these islands by the grid, not big connections, not big enough to take the wind that you are capable of creating and they could take. Did the people on Mull let you know about those problems?
Oh, yes, absolutely. What we talk about is generally the lack of being part of the bigger democratic process. Of course, it's possible for people to vote for kind of the general elections and all these sort of things, but they don't. It's not. Mull is not an independent municipality. They don't have their own government. They don't. I mean, they belong to Argyll Bute, the county, and I think they feel a little bit like they are not in business in their own community, and that is. I mean, they might be connected, but the ferry starts from Oban and go to Mull in the morning, and it ends in Oban also. So it's not made for the island, but for people from the mainland to go to the island to help these poor people. Where we have managed to make the ferry start on Samsø, my island, and end in the mainland. So I can participate in meetings in the mainland and go back in the evening because the ferry belongs to Samsø, not to the mainland. There's those little things that we're talking about. How do we make an independent society based on, what do you call it, to be masters of our own house, so to speak?
Yes.
Which they also do in Egg, where they are not connected and they have to do it. Where there's a lot of other things here that is similar to being disconnected or connected.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. So Viktoria, can you come in and give us your idea of what you thought was strong and weak out of COP26?
Yes, I'd love to. And thank you so much for inviting me tonight. It's an honor to be here and discuss these important issues. I think that the whole meeting gave us, it reflected more of a positive sentiment than before if you compare to the previous meetings. So that in itself was very positive, I would say. It's as if finally more and more countries are awakening and more are realizing the severeness of the situation, which I think in itself is positive. Speaking of figures, as somebody mentioned before me, I think that the regulations, I mean, for the Paris Agreement, that they were completed. That was the priority number one of the meeting, and they managed to deliver on it. So I think that's outstanding. I also think that the goal of reducing emissions to 45% by 2030, of course, is something that's been talked about here in Sweden and pointed out as something very positive. If I am going to pick out just one negative thing from the meeting, that has to be India and more countries alongside India's downplay of the phase out of fossil fuels. So not phase out, but phase down. And I think that was kind of a huge disappointment by the end of the meeting when everything was looking so good and so positive. And then that sort of negative twitch destroyed a lot of the positive sentiment, but overall, I think the meeting, we are on our way, and I think that many countries are now realizing the graveness of the situation, and that was clear based on that meeting's outcome, I would say.
Can I ask you, Viktoria, Sweden has recently had quite an interesting political couple of weeks where you've got a new Prime Minister, Social Democrat, who essentially lost the budget that she tried to put through, then lost the Green Party from her coalition, and is now in power, but having to be in power with a budget that was created by the right, essentially, in the Swedish parliament. Now, I'm explaining all that not just for our viewers because it's quite fascinating, but how does that impact on what Sweden is going to do? Because if the budget must be kept to, is it one that really puts a lot of money into the transitions that you need?
Well, good that you point this out. We've had a couple of very, very hectic weeks and interesting weeks politically. So Magdalena Andersson was voted into office today again for the second time in 1 week, and she's going to present her government tomorrow with her new list of ministers. That will be an entirely social democratic government, as opposed to before when they had the environmentalist party alongside them. I think overall, the loss of the Miljöpartiet, the environmentalists, from government is also a loss for the path going forward to renewables in one way. Having said that, there's only 10 months to go to the election, so this will not have a great impact in the short run. When it comes to budget-wise, the budget posed by the right wing obviously does not put as much emphasis into subsidies to renewables as a left wing or a more social democratic and environmentalist budget would have. But hopefully, as I said, this is only 10 months going forward now, and we'll see what happens this fall.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Now, listening to all of that is Keith Baker, who is our Scot. Keith, just you can reflect on what has been said so far and add your own thoughts. And actually, what really strikes me is perhaps our Nordic contributors are just awfully polite, and they really are, I think, or they are really not as critical of COP26 as most of us, really, who were quite engaged with the issue, sitting right here.
I know, and thanks for inviting me, and thanks for, to every of the panelists showing up. And I'm sat here thinking I'm going to be the negative one. I was really struggling to think of something positive, but actually Greta outside getting sweary with the strikers, I thought was, my highlight. Somebody with such a high profile rate, supporting the strikers and highlighting the need that, we need green jobs. We need fair pay for the, for the refuse workers, for the rail workers. This is something, one of the many things I will criticise the SNP over just as much as any other party. And of course, we have to throw the Greens into that now they're in coalition. So yeah, Greta's sweary speech that went around the world was brilliant. On the negatives, I'm going to call it and say I think we're now heading towards at least 2.4 degrees C average temperature rise. I've been in touch with Bill Maguire, who's a friend of mine down at UCL, who contributed a fantastic quote to the 21 for 21 climate actions campaign that Common Wheel put out over the summer. The two of us, I think, and plenty of others are getting really, really quite depressed about this situation. And in Scotland, we now have the situation where I'm sat here responding to the consultation on the Heat Networks Delivery Plan, which is an absolute car crash legislation delivered by people without sufficient technical knowledge. We've been telling the Scottish government for years that they need to follow the Danish model, and we'll come to this when we talk about district heating. But there just seems to be a lack of willingness, a lack of capacity, a lack of drive. We now have a situation where the Scottish Greens, by supporting the Hydrogen Action Plan, which talks of blue hydrogen, are actually now supporting the continued extraction of fossil fuels from the North Sea. So I'm sorry, guys, I'm really, really struggling to find positives, and I've been, dare I say, struggling a bit with my mental health because of it. I'm sat looking at the Working Group 3 report, which for the IPCC, which obviously I can't talk about, but what we've got is a reliance on future technologies. We might as well just say, well, fusion's going to come and solve the problem in 5 years, like we've been doing for the last however many decades. So sorry to be negative, but that's pretty much where I'm standing on the thing at the moment.
Well, it's always good to have somebody provoking, there's just loads of issues. I just wonder if we could have everybody just, all of you, Søren, Tore and Viktoria, just come in on what you want there. Some of it might have been difficult for you to understand because Keith was referring to Scottish powers, like, for example, the Heat Networks Delivery Plan. You might know that in Scotland, we have only 5% of homes on district heating. And that might be very related to the fact we have 85% of heating delivered by gas, which mostly comes from Norway, thanks to where you guys are smart enough to not use it. Now, that's one problem, and it's one that Denmark has been very much to the fore in trying to, well, the district heating systems from Denmark are being quoted by everyone as what we should be going for. But actually, also in Sweden, there is small smart grids just of a couple of buildings which are actually becoming producers of energy. They can even be charging up electric cars. So I wonder if we could just stop and go through these things a bit one by one, because it would help us a lot. Our big challenge is this question of heating, because at the moment, people are being left to have to finance that whole change themselves with yet another whole set of individual heating systems instead of a big shift to district heating. So can we just stick with that question of heating for a moment and just ask Søren, first of all, I mean, how does it work in Denmark?
So when we decided to cut the dependency on imported oil and coal from outside in our energy policy back from the 70s when we had the oil crisis, Denmark actually decided to work on a policy that made us independent from imported fuel from outside. So that was very pragmatic attitude to this, and say we have a cooperative ownership model that has been used since the Vikings, where people can get together and invest in infrastructure or things that serves the interest of the common. And district heating is exactly kind of that tool or instrument to do that. So instead of importing fuel from outside, we looked around on Samsø, in many other places of Denmark, to see what could replace heat fuel like oil and coal. And that was straw, wood chips, it could be waste. I mean, resources that we had flying around in our neighborhood that was either composted or just evaporated into thin air or producing a problem for us in dumps and other places here also. So that was actually a very early start on using local resources at a very reasonably low cost by installing a piping system where you have like a main pipe in a village and a central boiler where you can burn all these fuels or either or of these fuels and circulate the hot water to all the houses and take out the individual heating system. We have been able to produce that cheaper than imported fuel from outside, which is paying for the cost of it. And then we have a common maintenance program, common insurance and other things also. There's a lot of ripple effects that is helping the local community. And on top of that, another ripple effect is that when you import fuel from outside, then you have to earn the money locally and buy an imported product, where here we pay less for the same product, but we buy it from the next door neighbor who then pays tax in the local community. And we have a circular economy that will help and grow the local economy because it also produces jobs and stuff like that. So this is a very typical Danish pragmatic attitude to change, that instead of having a centralized big system where you serve a lot of purposes with one supplier, we have a multiple faceted supplier system where we use local resources to replace something that is very expensive from outside. That was a quite short version of the system. I don't know if that is to understand.
That was a masterpiece of clarity, actually. What's interesting there, because I see there's a question from Helen about, is there a challenge to deliver district heating in remote and rural settings? I mean, clearly not. I mean, Egg have got their little off-grid system. It's not a district heating system, but you do actually have district heating on the island of Samsø. What about just, on the mainland? How do you cope with just one house here, one house there? There must be places that district heating cannot reach.
Actually, from the very beginning, it was typically farmhouses that started this also, because they had extra supply of straw or biomass of some kind, cuttings from fences and woods and stuff like that. They didn't know how to use, and they could buy a modern furnace where they could make their own little individual heating system where they also could heat the stables or to dry grain or hay and stuff like that. So they could supply just one house, but then they bought some bigger boilers and then they could supply the next house as well. And then the limit of this is also, there's a limit to how long a distance you can have between two houses, because then the heat loss in the pipe will be too significant, and then you have to make a new system when the length extends a certain capacity. And so we have a lot of different scales of this system. It can be 3 houses, it can be 100 houses, 500 houses, or several thousand houses. So it's kind of the same thinking, but it scales with capacity and distance and resources.
God,
So today, who cannot be reached by this is using heat pumps, because heat pumps are using electricity, and electricity is produced from the nearby wind turbines. So we can use the electricity locally to produce the same kind of heat, and it doesn't need, there's no heat loss in the pipe because you serve it by electricity. So we are working with a system we call district heating without pipes, or kind of a wireless pipe system where they can pay the same per megawatt hour that they do on a water-based system, but they use electricity, but they don't own the facility, the heat pump. It's owned by the cooperative district heating system. So they just pay the same, and the system will supply them with a heat pump instead of using imported fuel from outside. And the reason for this is that we want to meet a very low carbon emission. So this is kind of our end goal, to be carbon free within a decade. So we need to kind of cut down on carbon emissions in every source we can find.
Wow. And just final question, so we just completely understand how this is possible. Is all of that dependent on you having very big cables with the mainland to have that, or not?
No, the district heating.
Not the district heating, but the electricity.
Well, yes and no. We are depending on big cables mainly because we are exporting a lot of electricity from from local-based wind turbines, because we put in a lot of extra capacity because we wanted to compensate for transport. So we have some really huge big ferries, and the ferries are guilty of about 40% of the total CO2 emissions. So that's a heavy polluter. So before we have electric ferries or hybrid electric ferries, we have compensated for the diesel that the ferries are using. But today we have one of the ferries we have run is a hybrid electric ferry. So we are gradually moving into a transport system where we're using the electricity from the wind turbines as well. But in the beginning, we needed the cable to export and compensate for the emission by producing CO2-free energy and sell it to the main grid. But we want to get rid of that dependency and sort of start using it locally when technology allows us to do it.
Okay, wow. Tore, have you got thoughts on any of that? Keith, you're going to have to come back in and be less gloomy at some point, or else very gloomy, because Scotland is so far from many of the component parts of what Søren described there. But I mean, you could pick up any of the other things that were mentioned, like blue hydrogen. Tore, I don't know if you want to pick up on that, because a lot of people are worried that the move towards hydrogen will actually be blue hydrogen, which really depends on fossil fuels continuing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can say a few things about it. So first of all, it's very interesting to hear what they have done at Samsø, because it's really advanced and really it's really nice to hear. So for Norway, of course, we are mainly, most of our heating is based on electricity, so it's a hydropower. So we do not have much CO2 emissions related to heating, as many other countries have. So what we are doing a lot in Norway is to invest now into batteries, so batteries for ferries, batteries on other transports offshore. We are investing, of course, a lot into electrical cars. So that's one place, so in the transport sector. And if we look at emissions in Norway, so compared to all of our neighbours, for instance, Denmark, Sweden, UK, their emissions have gone down a lot since, for instance, 1990, while in Norway it's been more or less flat or even increased if you look at the CO2 part of it. So that's mainly transport sector, and then it's oil and gas sector. So what Norway is doing now is to invest a lot to try to make the transport go more and more on electricity, and also oil and gas exploitation should be more and more driven by electricity. So we can get, what you say, not clean fossil fuel, but the production of fossil fuel will be without emissions. And then what you mentioned with blue hydrogen is also one of the things Norway is looking into, because that is to use the gas from the North Sea or from the Bergen Sea, to use gas, and then is to take out the CO2, and that is being done with the carbon capture, and also try to store the carbon in the North Sea. So Norway is investing a lot into these kind of new technologies, and some people believe this will be there is a future in it. Other people are more negative to it, and I guess I will be somewhere in between. So it may be something in the future, but I don't really believe in this blue hydrogen, because it will be too expensive to produce. And also with the gas prices that we see now, for instance, it will be extremely expensive to produce blue hydrogen. So I don't think that will be a future for, at least not for many.
I mean, Tore, you know, some people could say that Norway is cutting a surprising number of corners, really, with this, because we have a big discussion about carbon capture since a plant was expected to go to the northeast of Scotland, and perhaps for political reasons, it went to strange places in England instead. But in that discussion, many people pointed out that carbon capture would only ever deal with something like 1/10,000th of the emissions. You know, it's a tiny, tiny thing. Now, has Norway somehow got a better system, or is this just, you know, just for show?
No, there are many people that really believe in this. And for instance, Norway is now investing quite a lot of money into a facility just west of where I'm living, so west of Bergen. And that is to take CO2 from, so that's mainly from waste. So places where you are burning waste, and also places where you are producing concrete or cement factories. So that's where you have very large point sources. So the idea there is to take the carbon out of the gases or the waste from these power plants, and then to these plants, and then to bring it to this place west of Bergen, and then send it out in the North Sea. So there is actually a facility that has been built. But as you say, it's only a few, at least for now, it will only be a few places, and it will only be a tiny fraction of the total emissions in Norway.
Okay, and just to keep on the sort of naughty Norway theme, drilling. I noticed that there was agreement that the massive oil fields in Lofoten, the Lofoten Islands, there was agreement by the Arbeiderparti, the Labour Party, no, not to drill, which actually, just to pick up the point Søren made, was partly because the local council there decided no. And that's how powerful, folks, local councils are in Nordic countries. But anyway, I see now, though, that the government is talking about, it's issued new licenses in the Barents Sea, and it's still talking about drilling. So which is it?
So you're right. So there is an area of northern Norway, Lofoten area, that has now been protected for oil and gas. So it's just been, at least not the current government and not the previous government. They will not look into this. But we got the new government in September, and actually today they agreed on the budget. So now we have a center-left government, and they actually got an agreement on the national budget with the socialist left party. So it's quite far to the left. But if you look into the policy for oil and gas exploitation, then the two flanks of the Norwegian politics, they are more or less the same. So it's not the big parties in Norway. They more or less agree on the policy, and that is that we should, unfortunately, in my mind, we should still continue to look for new oil and gas fields. So there are some small parties that are against this, but the big Labour Party and the Conservatives, they both agree on that we should still continue to look for oil and gas.
But the search will go on in areas like the Barents Sea, which will be more difficult to find oil than Lofoten, which for people who are trying to think in Scotland, our big issue at the moment is the Cambo oil field near Shetland. And actually, the amount of the barrels that could be in Lofoten are something like 3, 4 times, 5 times more even than the enormous Cambo field. And that is not being drilled. It's much, much further north in new fields.
So the main reason for this Lofoten area is that it's the spawning ground for the cod stock. That also is, of course, an important thing for Norway. So I think that was the main reason for this area being protected for oil and gas exploitation. But again, Norway is one of the few countries in the world that still are pushing for oil and gas in the Arctic, for instance, and that's. But it is a more and more discussion in Norway also. But so far, both, as I said, both the two major parties in Norway, they both agree that we should continue to look for oil and gas. It's yeah.
Do you realise that will have astonished most people in Scotland?
What? Sorry.
Do you realise that knowing that Norway is drilling for oil in the Arctic will have astonished a lot of people in Scotland?
Yeah, it is, and it's also more and more difficult to actually come, for instance, to the international negotiations and argue that there still should be room for new oil and gas fields in the north. And for instance, Norway there is a prize given by. So during the COP meetings, there is a prize given by something called carbon. What's it called? It's someone that's organizing different environmental organizations, and they gave the fossil prize of the day to Norway. So that was the first day, and that is because the Norwegian Prime Minister, he argued that there still should be room for Norwegian gas, for instance, also in the transition towards renewable energy. So it's a difficult view to take, but still in Norway there is a political majority that say we should still look for oil and gas.
Well, thank you for being so honest. Viktoria, do you want to just come in on any of the debates you've heard there, and also on Keith's list of things that make him despair is the nuclear fusion, the expectation that everything else will just be too difficult, too hard to deliver, and people will shift back to nuclear. Now, Sweden actually has about 40% nuclear energy, I think, in its mix. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, if I should start off with on the nuclear topic, then we have 30% power production from nuclear power now, nowadays, I should say. We closed down 2 reactors a couple of years ago, and we've already closed down 2. So we're not standing as many as before. And of course, there's been a debate about this in Sweden when you have one political sort of part who wants more nuclear power, claiming that it's fossil free, and then you have the other part, political part, that's claiming no, thank you, no more nuclear power. So the reactors that are remaining in our system, they have increased their usage time to 60 years. So they will be probably running until past 2040, I would say, is what I've read so far. So this is for the Swedish industry, who are very much pro-nuclear power, for example. This is one of the cornerstones in our reliable power production, fossil-free reliable power production. So we really have clear sort of parties having very, very different views on nuclear power. Nevertheless, what they're claiming is that emission-free. So that's sort of one of the most positive aspects of nuclear power, and that's also what I've been hearing from other countries who are investing in new nuclear power. Obviously, it's emissions-free.
Yes, it has other aspects too, which tend to worry a lot of people in Scotland. And actually, Scotland it doesn't have control over energy. That's reserved to Westminster, but it's made clear that it will use its planning powers to stop any new nuclear power station being built here. However, I suppose it's fair to say that Scotland has so many other energy sources that we should be able to find a substitute. Does Sweden have, does Sweden have other alternatives, do you think, to nuclear, or is that going to be there to stay?
No, I don't think nuclear power is going to be here to stay. I think Sweden has many, many other alternatives. And I think Sweden, as a country, we have so much, we're really good at new technology. We're very good at sharing knowledge about new technology. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think, and many with me think, that there's a positive sentiment from the COP26, because we see the possibilities to do something differently. And we know that there is new technology. There are other paths to take. You don't have to go down the fossil ditch. You don't have to use nuclear power. You can use offshore wind. You can use onshore wind. You have the solar cell technology. You have hydrogen, and I'm not talking about the blue hydrogen. And you have, within our case, we have our hydropower. And of course, hydropower from an environmentalist perspective is very complicated, obviously. Sweden made a decision 150 years ago to invest in hydropower, and we're lucky today that we made that difficult decision. Nevertheless, it has a great impact on our environment. That's, bottom line. You cannot discuss that. So from where we are sitting, I think we have many opportunities to choose other paths after nuclear power. That's my personal opinion. And
sure.
So and I know that we have increased our wind power production massively the last 20 years. We're aiming at, I think we have about 20% wind power in our energy mix now. So that's a lot. Of course, that's volatile power. Of course, it's wind power. It's dependent on wind, but in combination with hydropower, then that's a very, very good combination. It will take you far.
Yeah, I see on the chat. I don't know if we could just tempt fate here. Tor Justad is there. Lily, can I ask Tor to just put his point himself?
Yes, you can. He can unmute himself, yeah.
Okay, Tor, can you unmute yourself and just ask the point that you had about nuclear? And we're not going to stay for long on nuclear, but just let's have this one.
Yes, thank you, Lesley. I'm involved in a group in the Highlands called Highlands Against Nuclear Transport that has campaigned for many years to prevent the transport of nuclear waste 400 miles from Dounreay in the far north of Scotland near Thurso down to Sellafield in Cumbria, which is the big nuclear waste dump in Great Britain. We have widened our campaign to take in both nuclear power and nuclear weapons. But on the nuclear power side, there was a proposal for a nuclear fusion plant in Dounreay very recently with money from the government, and we opposed that. And their bid has actually been turned down, although it's still going to go to a different location in England. Surprise, surprise. So we're opposed to nuclear fusion because they've spent 70 years trying to get it to work, and they've never made it work yet. They've spent billions of pounds on it in about 5 or 6 different countries, and it's as far away from being a reality as it ever was. So those are some of the reasons. And it also produces waste. People don't realize that nuclear fusion produces less radioactive waste, but larger quantities. So you still have this waste problem of having to store. We have 500 tons of waste in the UK, and it's got to be stored underground is the proposal at the moment. That's the community in Cumbria, which is now accepting the offer of placing it in their community in return for a £1 million bribe. So that waste has to last for 100,000 years. So we're opposed to fusion, and we're also opposed to small modular reactors. This is another last gasp from the nuclear industry to keep going with the nuclear industry, which is dead on its heels and is actually decreasing worldwide. So we have to get rid of nuclear. Huge problems with waste. It's unsafe, unstable, and it's not the answer for the future. So that's a sort of campaigning answer to your question, but that's what we've been doing in the Highlands to try and prevent any new nuclear developments in this area. Okay,
thank you so much for that. That was very, very to the point. But I think, it might be there's more agreement amongst our speakers than disagreement perhaps on these things. I wonder if I could bring Keith back in, because you were the one that started all these balls rolling. What have you made of what you've heard there?
I'm loving hearing the positivity from our Nordic friends, and I'm sat here thinking of the Scottish context and the amount of obfuscation and Propaganda. It is propaganda being pushed out by the SNP and the Greens around our potential. One of the things we've been pushing really, really hard on with Commonweal is the Danish model of district heating, where you get large-scale solar thermal interseasonal heat stores. So
right.
2 cornerstone.
Keith, this is your first yellow card, right? If I had one, slow down. Partly because you're speaking kind of, and also because the audience is not as familiar with a lot of these ideas that you spend your life working with. So,
sorry, one of the things we push really hard on is this Danish model, which Søren has summarised brilliantly in terms of the ownership aspect. The technology aspect is bringing in large-scale solar thermal arrays. So solar thermal, the sorts of panels that you have on your house to produce hot water. Combine that with interseasonal heat storage, which is basically like covered reservoirs and boreholes, and you use that to store excess heat during the summer, and then you get it out and into a heat network during the winter.
Right, stop. Now, just because, I mean, for a lot of people, this is like, what? And actually we had a question earlier on about whether the whole district heating thing works for tenements. And actually, it's probably, I'd imagine, pretty much easier for any kind of concentrated housing. But your idea, if I understand this rightly, is that you don't need to have solar panels on each individual house. You put them collectively in one place and have a collective heat store, so that works for the little mini network of houses.
Yeah, I would put solar thermal panels on pretty much every house anyway, because even if you're getting only a small amount of hot water out of them, it's an easy win. It's cheap, it's reliable, it's proven, and I actually think that all the solutions that we need to all our energy problems are with us now. It's just a matter of how we make them work together. And what the Danes have been brilliant on, particularly Ramboll, the big engineering consultancy who've done a lot of those projects, is combining that large-scale solar arrays with the heat stores and with any number of other technologies, which can be recovering waste heat from buildings, biomass, sustainable biomass, local sustainable, as Søren was saying, and that's really important. You can plug in heat pumps, you can plug in a lot of renewable technologies, but it's the strategic planning that the Scottish Government has missed. And up until very, very recently, it's even missed the technology side. What I'm finding really quite shocking about the current proposals is they're looking at demand. They're not doing what Søren was saying about where the Danes started with looking where the supply was. They're trying to look at where the demand might be, and they're basing it on energy models, which for years and years I've been telling the Scottish Government are fundamentally flawed, and yet they carry on believing them. The Danes have got a fantastic history with district heating, going back to the turn of the last century. And for some reason, the Scottish Government continuously fails to learn from that Danish experience. The Danes brought in a Heat Supply Act in 1979, and that was the start of building up the legislation where you basically compels, too strong a word, but you mandate people with excess energy to connect to buildings that can use it for heat. This is something that the Scottish Government has continuously refused to implement.
Can I just see if the other countries, Sweden, because district heating, it's like many things with the Nordic countries. You go to one Nordic country and think, gosh, that's interesting. Look how they do that. Then you go to another one and think, oh, look, they do it as well. And finally, you realize that the only weird thing is here, that we don't do it. So, Viktoria, how does it work with you?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to write in the chat actually about Swedish district heating. We were pioneers in central district heating. We started in the 50s to equip all major cities with district heating facilities. So as far as I understand it, in Denmark, they're more decentralized. In Sweden, they are more centralized and bigger. So we have them in Stockholm, we have them in Malmö, in all the major cities. We have large CHP plants, mainly fired by waste and biomass. So fossil-free and for heating. And that one of the advantages, obviously, is that you detach the energy system. You separate heating from the usage of electricity. So in high peak situations, you can always use your power for what you need it for, and you know that you always have your heating on, so to speak, in a cold country like ours, and in Denmark, same thing. So,
So what was it back in the 50s? Because unfortunately, we are where you were in the 1950s, which is a pretty terrible realization.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So what happened?
In the 50s, we started sort of refurbishing Sweden, so to speak. It was the era of folkhemmet. It was the era of building our modern way of life, so to speak.
That's the folkhemmet, is the people's home, that whole package of welfare and everything.
Yeah, so that's when we cracked the nut about CHPs and the district heating. And then, of course, with the oil crisis, we exaggerated these plans because we had to disconnect from oil, basically. So the creation of district heating and centralized district heating in Sweden is one of the reasons why we are not dependent on oil to the same extent as many other European countries.
And is this because Sweden, like Denmark, maybe more so, didn't really have oil reserves like Norway and Britain? I mean, when you realized you were dependent on oil with the oil crisis of the 1970s, you must have realized your energy security was almost nil.
I imagine that was the reason. I was born during the 70s, but as I think Søren said earlier, I mean, being dependent on importing expensive fuels for your energy supply in the long run, that's very negative for your economy. So that's one aspect. But then, of course, when we are here today, the other aspect is, of course, that we are 98% fossil free in our electricity production in Sweden.
Yeah, Søren wants to come in. Can I just
more 99%?
Yeah, Søren.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that it was not just oil crisis that made us aware of the potential of district heating. It was also like a philosophy of good housekeeping, where all the main or the central power stations in the old days from producing electricity from coal and oil were always almost entirely situated near a big city. So there was a short distance from the power stations, and the cooling, I mean, almost 30% of the production of electricity is evaporated into thin air. You have these big cooling towers where you evaporate if you can't cool it with seawater and other things also. So some smart Danes or Swedish or Scandinavian people were thinking, that's not good housekeeping. So we started piping the cooling of the engines or the generators of electricity to the houses. Very inefficient in steel pipes, not insulated at all, but it was the beginning of district heating, and it was working perfectly. So somebody saw that this is the potential, so maybe we should make entirely district heating and not just cooling of district heating. So it started kind of with some smart guy thinking we shouldn't waste the hot water from cooling the generator into the sea. We should pump it into the houses and use it for heating.
And I wonder, just I'll bring Tore in again here, but how much of this, Søren, before you disappear again, was because of what you picked up about Mull not having local control? I mean, could you have done what you've done if you were part of a large council that also included, half of the mainland?
I think we've always had a tradition that energy production is organized by the state. So we don't have private energy production in Denmark. Not originally. They were part of a Danish state-owned power system. And because it was organized, then it was also it was governed in a democratic way.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of the basis for people to be able to think differently from a business point of view, where the end consumer is buying electricity or heat or whatever. So you have separated supply system. You have an electricity system where you can sell them electricity. You have a gas system where you can sell them gas, and you have other things also. And I think we didn't have that. We have it more and more today because the market is more and more privatized, but we still have remaining remnants of a democratic governed energy supply system. And I think that is kind of key to sensible housekeeping, what do you call it, the philosophies about how not to waste energy.
So is it the Danish Energy Agency that still runs quite a lot of things?
So the big stuff is organized by something called Energinet. I can type the website on it, because Energinet is administrating the gas grid and the electricity grid, the backbone, the high voltage system. So the distribution system is still governed by the state. And I think that is very important, because then the supply system could be cooperatively owned or privately owned, but they have to obey rules that is decided by democracy. And I think that is kind of why we can still control how we use the law to protect kind of losses and not import stuff from outside if it's not in line with the policy.
I just wonder, and any of you, Tura, for example, I'm not asking you to look at Britain and kind of laugh or cry, but when you see all of the Nordic speakers, when you've seen the problem that we have at the moment with dozens of energy companies, private energy suppliers going out of business, and really people being handed on with massive price increases, with a kind of just an energy market that was privatized basically 30 years ago, it feels like we have none of the control or strategy that Søren is describing. I wonder, do you look at us and just think, wow, why did you do that?
No, I will not do that. So it's of course it's different systems, and just very brief. It's with Norway. So most houses in Norway they are heated by electricity, and then we have district heating for typically big customers like the hospital and university and the big companies. They are typically having district heating. And then of course, as I said, Norway is a big exporter of gas, and you said that 85% of the gas consumption in UK is from Norway, or is by gas. So it's I think the way out for UK is that it should be wind driven. So offshore wind, for instance, could be one thing that's coming more and more. So I would guess that going from gas to electricity is perhaps a better way than to go via district heating. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this, but at least to bring in electricity combined with heat pumps, for instance, it's a much more easy thing to install than to have a district heating in all houses. But again, I'm not expert at all.
I suppose what I was trying to do was to tempt yourself or Viktoria into a political observation, in that what Søren seemed to be saying and what it looks like to us is that we have so little control of the levers in Scotland because energy is controlled in Westminster, but in Britain because energy was privatised by Margaret Thatcher, and now it's hard to drive strategy because it comes via private mechanisms without the kind of democratic input that Søren was describing. I mean, as I understand it, Equinor, which is the successor to Statoil, is still 2/3 owned by the Norwegian state. The hydro is owned by the municipalities, by the state. Mm-hmm. Does that not quite important? It might be hard for you to imagine what it's like to be where we are now, where everything is owned by private companies.
Yes, it is like Søren says, it is a way that the democracy can work also when it comes to energy. So we have a very small crisis in Norway now because the electricity prices, they have skyrocketed the last month or so. So now it's really a political discussion about the energy system and what Norway should do to keep energy prices low, essentially for Norway. So now it's actually a discussion about energy also in the domestic market, but we have, of course, since, as you say, it's owned either by the government or by the municipalities. So it's much more the politicians can do in Norway, I guess, than what they can do in Scotland or in Britain as such.
Okay, right, Viktoria, and then Keith, and then I'm going to come for some more questions from the audience.
Yeah, just to broaden the perspective a little bit on Sweden. So our power market was deregularized the 1999 going into the 2000. So even though we have the Swedish TSO, which is Svenska Kraftnät, who, similar to Denmark, own the backbone of the infrastructure, the 400 kilovolt network in Sweden, we do have a separation between the grid companies, who are usually owned by, or always owned by the municipalities, so-called natural monopolies. And then you have the power companies that actually sell your kilowatt hour that you use at home, and they are privatized since 20 plus years back. So there has been a development, and there has been well, all these years, there has been discussions about this fact, but I think that we're still sort of leaning towards the history of Sweden. We're still leaning towards the decisions back in the days when we had huge control over the infrastructure and over the planning of the society, basically. I think that must be one of the differences also. You know, how you wanted to, how you portrayed the fundament and the outline of your society, I imagine.
But then, as well as these big central ideas, you also were nodding when I was talking about the new ideas in Sweden when it comes to district heating, even for just very small buildings becoming, I think there's a phrase here, becoming a prosumer, that you're actually producing energy as well as being consumers of it. That's fascinating, because it means that every house is potentially a production unit of energy, and it always was.
Yes, that's right. It's only a couple of years back that you actually, it was decided that you could sell back your surplus power from your own house into the grid again and get paid by it. To start with, you didn't get paid. You just gave it. But now there's a function since a few years back that enables people to sell back, and also being a prosumer in that sense.
But if you were to stick electric cars into that equation, you can be using your car as a battery.
Yeah, that's right.
So can someone put that all together? I mean, what is the future going to look like? Because you're closer to it. Norway has the highest amount of electric vehicles in the world per head of the population. There's a lot of local energy. You're all nodding because this is a familiar idea to you. I mean, how soon will it be that you've got right down to the units where energy isn't seen as a problem, but actually is being produced by every house and using batteries, the cars, to cleverly store energy?
Yes, so we are going in that direction. So there's more and more smart, smart steering of the electricity now. So people are installing devices on everything. So if you are heating your water in your bathtub, or when you are charging your battery in your electric car. So this system is coming now. So people have what's called a spot price. So then you can charge your car when it's cheap electricity, and then you can put it back on the grid when it's expensive electricity. So this is coming more and more, and of course people are combining it with rooftop solar panels, and they're combining it with other things. So I think this is the future that's coming over this smart I don't know what the name is, but it's the smart steering of how you are using energy and how you are producing energy. So then you get this prosumers, or you are consuming part of the day, and then you are producing or sending back to the grid other parts of the day. So it's absolutely the future with this smart steering. Yeah.
Right, Keith, I know you think that this is the future too. How far is Scotland? What's the bits of kit or structure, or what do we need to be able to be getting towards this kind of thing?
I'm going to try and tie a few things together. I mean, first of all, I noticed Anne Martin's comments about bulb energy just going under or being brought into public ownership. one of the problems we have is that under the expansion, in the name of choice, in the name of consumer choice, we have this big rush of retail energy companies that basically just buy energy from a generator and sell it onto a household, and somehow have to make a profit out of that, by better customer service or whatever they can squeeze. And what we've seen is, people in the UK will know, we've had a whole load of these companies going to the wall, including Bulb, who have got 1.7 million customers. I think what we're going to get at some point is an intervention for one of the big tech companies. I know from a friend of mine who was consulted by them as far back as 2009, Google were looking at getting into the market. And I think what a lot of energy companies are absolutely terrified of is that one of the big tech giants will make an inroad into the market. People who, companies that we give our data to and that we trust our data with, much more so in many cases than the government. So yeah, I do think that's coming, and I think we're I don't know how far away, but the day will come when individual customers can buy and sell, households can buy and sell energy directly between the generators and the grid. And I think one of the biggest disappointments over the last few months has been we've had an opportunity to build up a publicly owned generation asset in the form of a public energy company. That has now been twice promised and twice reneged on by Nicola Sturgeon. She had her opportunity back in September when Monica Lennon, MSP, put a motion to Parliament to establish a public energy company. This is a policy that's supported by the vast majority of members of the SNP and the Greens. Both of those parties voted against that amendment, which was absolutely shocking. But even the model that Nicola was talking about when she was making her failed promises was a retail energy company. And Commonweal and myself and others have argued for a long time that no, we need to bring public energy generation and infrastructure back into public ownership. And I'm not going to say that overnight that means totally renationalizing everything. It won't happen that way. But if we have assets, we can start using those assets to generate more private investment, to generate more community investment, and to get the whole system working and strategically plan it. And I'm really, I'm struggling to be optimistic throughout this whole thing, but I think it's a good, for those people in Scotland, look at what has been promised by the government and what has actually been delivered, and look at the details of it. We need a radical change, and maybe that will come from a company like Google or Apple, who do have who already own large amounts of renewable energy anyway. But we do need, something needs to happen, and I don't think it'll happen in the same way that we've seen in the Scandinavian countries, because we are so far away from where you guys are.
Oh, this is depressing. Tore, you're actually nodding there, Viktoria, as well, about the possibility of Google entering the energy market.
I don't know, but perhaps Google can also come in. So, but we're also seeing this kind of companies coming in Norway now. For instance, the one called Tibber in Norway. So they have this smart. So they are selling energy on the spot market, and then they have this this smart grid in each houses. So that's a similar thing. But for sure, when the big players like Google or perhaps even Facebook, when these are coming into people's houses, then of course things can go very fast. So it's
right. That's just a scary prospect, hugely scary actually. So that's really thrown me, because that seems like quite a horrific prospect actually. But I mean, I wonder, in that we've just got about 10 minutes left, and I think most people here, I see some comments coming in, including Tudor Barnard. Actually, Tudor, can you just come in and say your own thing there? Can you unmute yourself, Tudor? Yeah.
Unmute, it says. Right.
Yes.
Is that okay?
It is.
Right. I think what Viktoria has completely missed from the Swedish perspective is the fact that Sweden has enormous forests, and forests are renewable. There is a debate going on just now about how to manage forests properly, whether they should be seen as plantations to be exploited for paper and things like that, or whether they should be seen in a completely different context. And I would say, I've been slightly following this debate, I would say that the big forestry companies want to see plantation type methods, but there are a lot of medium-sized and small forest owners in Sweden, and they are, generally speaking, more interested in progressive environmental aspects of forestry management. And so that's one thing I'd like to say. Also, the fact that wood is not just to be burnt. I think there's a 12 or 16-story house or building, I should say, in Skellefteå, which has just been opened and is made of wood. The whole thing. Oof. So that would be my take on the Swedish situation, that we have enormous forests, we have vast areas of wilderness. From that point of view, perhaps there is a comparison with Scotland. And I think we will find that sensible forestry management will turn out to be a very useful component of renewable energy in Sweden. Okay,
Viktoria, do you want to come back in? Thanks, Tudor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tudor, for sharing. For sure, you're right about that, about what you're saying about Sweden. And there is a debate going on whether what we should use our forests for. And the power industry, behind large CHPs, for example, of course, they point out the fact that you only burn the rest, what's not used for anything else. So you don't take down trees to put into to make heat from, obviously. However, the environmentalist groups argue that the trees, they how do you say in English? They store carbon, which is very, very valuable for everyone. So they shouldn't be touched anyway. Doesn't matter what you do with them. So that there's a debate going on there, obviously. But I do think that Tudor has a point. We have vast areas with large forests, and we can use them for building, not the least. And yes, I've seen the building in Skellefteå, and it's massive. It's really cool. And then again, the critique says that we used to build out of wood, but then we had huge fires. So, yeah, very interesting discussions going forward, definitely.
Yeah. Does Tudor or Søren just want to come in on that point, just on biomass and forestry? Because a lot of people have got quite a bad association with biomass, because it so often in Scotland has been imported, actually, halfway across the world to be burnt. And that has made everybody think incinerators, no, biomass, no. So is there something to be said for it? Søren?
Yes, I think I agree that it's not a good idea to import biomass from the Baltic area, or from Canada, or from any other country outside your own territory. I think biomass has a role if it's like produced within kind of the neighborhood of where you consume it, and I say that mainly because that's what we do. So maybe I try to make an excuse for ourselves. But if you look at straw or remains from farm products, where we actually plow down like 20% or 30% of the biomass to maintain the microbes and the biomass in the topsoil, which is more or less what the topsoil can absorb and digest. If you put more biomass in, we have to add more fertilizer to make a good compost. So the remaining 70%, some is used for bedding for animals and other things also, but we have abundant amounts of it that we can use to bale and put into the furnaces and burn and use for local heating purposes. We take the ashes out of the boiler, the compartment, the furnace, and then we bring it back to the farms and spread it on the fields, because there's still kalium and phosphorus and minerals in it that is useful for the soil. So we only kind of lend the carbons while burning it. So the straw absorbs the same amount of carbon as it releases when it's burned. And then in addition to, we have a little carbon dioxide emission from the transport, but that's not a lot. So I think it makes sense if it's homegrown and locally produced. Then I think we can be in a responsible way use biomass.
And you're talking as well about the condition of your soil. I mean, it's lovely to listen because you obviously are still a farming island because it's farmers that understand a lot of this circular economy. But like
absolutely. We have a big vegetable production, so farmers are very aware of the condition of the soil. We can't produce high quality vegetables if we don't keep the soil in good condition. So we have to feed the microorganisms with biomass. So we need to keep a certain amount of it, but we do a lot of tests and investigations in what's the limit of how much we can take, how much we have to stay in circulation.
Tori, I just wonder if you know anything about this, because I was at an event run by the Revive Coalition in Scotland, who are very concerned about the fact that a fifth of Scotland is a driven grouse moor. It with all the strange practices that goes on there, including lots of burning, sometimes poison that's on those moors, and actually they're making the point that you can have a view about the birds and the shooting and hunting, that's to one side, but the way that soil has been degraded is really, really important, and we don't understand enough that soil, the actual land, is locking in carbon, and it doesn't do that when it's damaged. Our peatlands, for example, when they're damaged, they don't lock in.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very important what you say. So of course biomass is a renewable energy source. But for instance, in Scandinavia, lots of carbon is stored, actually not, well, also in the trees, but also lots of carbon is stored in the soil. So one should be extremely careful how, for instance, what kind of machines one is using, how one is taking out this forest, for instance. And that also has to do with road building. It has to do with if you are draining these bogs or these peats to make parking lots, whatever you are making. So this is an issue that people are more and more aware of. This, how much carbon are actually stored in the soil and how easy it is to release this into the atmosphere. So that's one thing. And then of course, when it comes to this usage of forest, it has also to do with biodiversity. One should be really careful how much one is taking out, how one is doing it. So this, if you're just flattening everything, or if you're just taking out small patches of forests, so it is a big issue. But I think people are more and more aware of this, more and more concerned about this, conservation of nature on the one hand, and on the other hand, trying to get more energy out of it. So but it is a delicate balance. Yeah.
Okay, we've reached almost the end of our time. I just wanted to finish by asking all the speakers just what for your country do you think is the number one thing? I know this is really difficult because it's always a basket. I understand that. So you can cheat, but roughly the one thing that you think is the big challenge that you need to crack. So let's start with Søren in Denmark.
I think we have two main issues. We are transporting goods way too much. So transportation and resources is a really big issue. We're living in a welfare state and we are over consuming, and which means that we're also over transporting. And we haven't solved that yet. It is creating a lot of consumption that is kind of wasted. And I think we should look into this in the next paradigm of evolution, where we are looking at much more efficient ways of living, more smart thinking, and looking into the next technology, move or leap that we're waiting for. Transportation is a really big issue.
Yeah. Okay, Viktoria, Sweden.
Yes, I'm going to cheat. As you said, there's a basket. But I would like to mention, firstly, we have to figure out how to replace nuclear power when we come to that. I am convinced that we will be able to do it easily through new technology, through, for example, as I mentioned before, wind power, onshore, offshore, solar panels, Internet of Things, how you use your energy, and so on. But there is still a debate, not in my backyard. People are not so keen on, for example, having wind power next door. So that's one thing. And then secondly, we have to speed up the processes for new infrastructure when it comes to building new grids, new network, both nationally within our country and also to other countries, because we need to transport more power in our sort of long country going from north to south, if we are going to make the transition for the transports going from fossils to electricity.
Okay, Keith?
Oh God, I'm going to have to get political, aren't I? I think the biggest challenge is the lack of technical knowledge amongst our civil servants, and the number of civil servants who have previously had jobs in organisations such as the Energy Saving Trust, which is a private not-for-profit company and notorious for lobbying the Scottish Government to design policies that it then goes on to deliver badly. I think we need to get past the political spin. Sorry, but we are not the best small country in the world for energy. We're actually very, very far from it. We need to get away from the, every time somebody like me posts on Twitter critical of Nicola of energy policy, yeah, I'm doing that because I've studied it for years and I've even published the odd book on it. We have to be honest with ourselves. We are, we are lacking in technical capacity in the civil service. We have an awful lot of yes people within the civil service. The Scottish Government is being lobbied effectively by the likes of the EST and also by the fossil fuel industry. And I actually think we need a proper Green Party. And you guys may be aware the Green Party down south is a different party. There's a lot of things that are going on that are very, very concerning. And I know we've mentioned in our talk, Monica Lennon, the Labour MSP, being nerfed, being demoted from her position as an energy spokesperson. A fantastic person who's spoken out on the need for a public energy company. People like Doug Chapman, my MP, who is not getting the attention he deserves. Joanna Cherry has been fantastic on energy issues, but of course we hear about her because of her views on other things. So I think a lot of our problems are actually largely political and educational, and that really goes to the heart of, I think, Scotland's problems that go a lot wider than energy issues.
Right, so that is the cheery summary. Although the tremendous shame of all of this is listening to Viktoria talking about the alternatives that need to come in for nuclear and that base load that it provides. Is that tidal energy is one of the huge possibilities that has always sat stalled. I say this as someone whose family comes from the Pentland Firth, right at the north of Scotland, that's looking at the fastest tidal stream sites in the whole of Europe and just never managed to crack how to get tidal into a commercially deliverable property. Although that is happening, we might lose the companies because they just aren't really getting the help that they need. So, we've got so much to give in Scotland. It's maddening that we can't seem to get this together. So, Ture, you're going to be on the last word here. Norway, what's the biggest challenge? And you can cheat as well.
Well, I can say two things actually. So one is the oil and gas industry. So that is what is causing our emissions to increase, or why it hasn't decreased. So that's something. So that's number one, I guess. So we know that at some point we will have to not phase down, but actually phase out the oil and gas industry. So that's one issue, and another issue.
Can I interrupt you? Sorry, when I've just asked, because please. How much oil and gas are you? Because you're actually exporting the problem mostly. Mm-hmm. So are you meaning that success happens when you just stop using it completely, but hey, you can still keep exporting it? Or is success when you stop exporting and stop drilling?
No, so what we have to phase it completely out. So that is stop drilling. So, and when this will happen, I don't know, perhaps in 20 years, perhaps in 30 years. But at some, of course, also if Europe will succeed, if Europe will be successful in this transition, then of course there will be no buyers for Norwegian oil and gas at some point. So this will happen, but we don't know when. But this is one issue, and another issue, and I think I will echo Søren, is this overconsumption. So Norwegians are extremely rich, and we are consuming much more than what the rest of the world is, or most others in the world is consuming. So that is another thing. We have to do quality, we have to do recycling, we have to be more like circular economy. So we cannot continue to consume as much as we are consuming. So it's simply it's not big enough planet for this. So that's number two. And the third one is we still need more renewable energy. And so I think we had lots of plans for onshore wind, like they have in Sweden, for instance, but that is completely that's been completely stopped. It was not it was so much resistance against it. So now people are looking for offshore wind. So I think offshore wind will be a big thing in Norway, and perhaps also floating offshore wind, like the one you have outside Scotland, the Hywind Scotland. So this is coming now. So I think this will be big in the future.
Just one last cheeky thought. I suppose I'm trying to remember if Norway and Sweden have joined BOGA, which is Beyond Oil and Gas, which Denmark has established with, I think, Costa Rica, and was really given a big push at COP26. Beyond Oil and Gas. I mean, Denmark is out there kind of leading the way, actually, amongst all the Nordics. Are your countries members of that? Because I think shamefully, Scotland said it might join as a friend sometime down the line, even though Wales has joined immediately. But then, of course, Wales probably doesn't have as much oil drilling as Scotland has to lose. Are you guys members of BOGA yet? No.
I don't know, to be honest.
Søren might know. Did you know?
No, I don't know either.
Okay, so it looks like, I think you're very possibly, Denmark is now sort of ahead of the pack.
Maybe.
That must make you grit your teeth, the rest of you, but is that true? Oh, come on. Yeah, they're not speaking, they're just going, yes, but we just don't want to talk about it. Okay.
I can give Denmark that they are well ahead when it comes to decentralized district heating and also the usage of wind power, because they were definitely pioneers in the Nordics when it comes to wind power. We've all been inspired by you, definitely, I would say.
But if I understand it rightly, Denmark has committed to stop drilling, and actually Denmark does have some activity in the North Sea. I think it's mostly for gas. But anyway, let me not push this too far, because perhaps maybe it's something that even Søren doesn't have all the details on.
Well, there is a political decision to stop drilling, so that has been decided. I can't remember what year it is. Maybe it's 2030 or something like that.
Yeah.
They need to finish their platforms and take them away. So they will be out of oil by, I think it's 2030. But I can look it up. I'm not sure.
That's okay. You've done more than enough. Don't worry, we'll look it up. And probably people will be looking up quite a lot. Can I just say, there's been all the way through, Dan has been posting links to quite a number of the things that our Nordic friends have been talking about. So if you are very interested in them, you can just cut and paste, hopefully. And we'll put more links up on the website later at nordichorizons.org, where there'll also be clips of kind of some of the most significant things that you've seen here. We'll have them on social media. So if there's anything you want to just send on to people, say, look, you should really listen to this, the whole actual discussion will be there as well. So, I mean, really, thank you so much to everybody who also braved the technology at the beginning. And by gum, do we need to have a little rehearsal the next time. But anyway, I'm so glad that you persevered for us. And just actually, your explanations are so crystal clear as well for us. It just describes a world that seems to make sense. I've been watching these chats all the way through, and that's what people keep saying. It's the way that what you're describing is a kind of, okay, it's not a perfect world, but it's a world that at least has some control and strategy in it, which it just keeps feeling we don't have. So anyway, very grateful to you, also to Keith Baker for overcoming all his bad feelings about the whole fraught area now of what you can hope for in Scotland, to kind of articulate some of that those misgivings, because we need to be speaking about this. We've just got to do better. We just have to do. So thanks, everybody. Just to say to you, if you do want to look at the crowdfunder, it would really help us. So have a look on nordichorizons.org, and the information's all there. Thanks to the Nordic Horizons team. And I was going to say safe home, but you're all in your homes. So thank you very much, and good night.